Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. I thank you for watching. In this video I want to talk about the great Christian theologian Saint Augustine. Now Saint Augustine, he's a 4th century Christian theologian, as I mentioned. It took him time in his life to become a Christian. He experimented with other belief systems, but later in his life, by the influence of his mother and a figure named Saint Ambrose, ended up converting to Christianity and became one of its most important theologians. Now, I don't want to focus on Augustine's biography. Rather, I want to focus on some of his key theological ideas, especially as they pertain to thinking about human nature, and so the topics I'm going to be dealing with are the problem of evil, the problem of divine foreknowledge, and the problem of original sin. So these are 3 heavy-duty problems, and I want to just sketch the problem or the problems, and then after sketching the problem, I want to say something about what Augustine's response to the problem is, and where it's relevant, say something about how his responses teach us about what he thinks about human nature. So let's begin with the problem of evil. So the structure will be, I'll talk about the problem, and then I'll talk about Augustine's response. There'll be 3 such problems, beginning with the problem of evil. So there's a problem of evil. What's the problem of evil? Well, simply put, it's the problem of how evil can exist in a world in which God exists. So that's to put it just very sketchily. But when you unpack the idea of God, it seems like the problem becomes more pressing. Okay, when you set aside the problem of God and don't really examine very carefully the concept, you might think, well, there's no real problem here. But when you dig a bit deeper, the person who argues that there is a problem of evil, is going to try to say that something's got to give. Either you're going to say evil doesn't exist, you're going to say that God doesn't exist, because they seem to be mutually exclusive. Why? Because God traditionally has the quality of being omnipotent. God also has the property of being omniscient and omnibenevolent. Okay, so those are 3 traditional qualities that God has. Now, in a straightforward way of unpacking the problem of evil, it's basically this. And if given God's omnipotence, God would have the power to eliminate all evil. It seems like that's something within the power of an all-powerful being would be to eliminate all evil, not permit any to exist. So God certainly, at least according to the problem, the proponent of the problem of evil is going to say God certainly has the power to eliminate all evil. But God also has the goodness to want to eliminate all evil. Why would God want us to suffer? It's asked rhetorically. So God's goodness, it gives us reason to think that God would desire the elimination of all evil. So not only does God have all the power to eliminate all evil, but God also has the right kind of desires. He desires to eliminate all evil. And surely God, as God, being an all-powerful being, could bring about what God desires. And then lastly, God is omniscient, so God knows when and where all evil occurs. So traditional idea of God is that God knows everything, okay, past, present, and future. God knows everything, and so then it stands to reason that God knows when and where all evil occurs or would occur. So you can't say that God doesn't know when and where evil occurs to let him off the hook. If that's, again, if you're a proponent of the problem of evil, that's how you kind of want to set things up. So God's omnipotence, his omnibenevolence, and his omniscience give us good reason for thinking that all evil would be eliminated. So that's the problem of evil in a nutshell. Augustine isn't moved by this line of argument. He does think that it needs to be dealt with. He thinks that it needs to be responded to, even though he thinks that the argument fails. So at the core of Augustine's response is the idea of free will. So he offers sometimes what's called a free will defense, or a free will theodicy. The term theodicy comes from the Greek term theodekushene, which means God, and the dekushene means justice. So you bring in God's justice when someone comes and says that the problem of evil gives us reason to think that God isn't as good as he is claimed to be, or isn't as powerful, or isn't as knowing as he's supposed to be. And so the idea of free will is invoked. I'm sure many listeners, you've heard of this idea before. So we find its origin in someone like Augustine. And Augustine, he basically says that if we genuinely have free will, so if it's generally true that God created us as part of our nature to have free will, the ability to either to do what's good or to do what's bad, then we can use our free will to do bad, to bring about evil in the world. And so, and if we have genuine free will, then it's not possible for God to control our will. If our will is genuinely free, then it turns out to be impossible, in the logical sense, for God to determine what our will does. So it's through the exercise of human free will that evil is brought about, and God can't be held responsible for that. Moreover, God retains his omnipotence, okay, because no being whatsoever could possibly determine the will of a free being. Okay, God remains omniscient, and God remains omnibenevolent, and he may retain his omnibenevolence, you say, because, or Augustine could say, because God sees some great good in allowing us the ability to choose either good or bad. So free will is the move here. Some kind of free will defense is Augustine's move. And this is related to his theory of human nature. It's human nature to be such that we're created by God, created in God's image, and created freely. And it's through the use of free will that we end up creating evil. So there's no contradiction, okay? There's no tension in believing at one and the same time that God exists as an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent being, and evil existing on the other hand. Okay, so that's the problem of evil, and that's Augustine's response, and that's how his response, and we see how his response is related to his theory of human nature. Okay, so the second problem, the problem of divine foreknowledge. Okay, God is omniscient. We've already been through God's omniscience. An omniscient being is a being that knows everything, past, present, and future. So if God is an omniscient being, then God knows everything that's going to happen in the future, including everything that you or I do. So if that's true, then it looks like we have to do what God knows we're going to do. So if we have to do what God knows we're going to do, then we can't be free in doing what we do. Why? Because to be genuinely free, we have to have alternate possibilities open to us. Okay? To be genuinely free, I'll repeat, we have to have more than one option open to us. But if God knows what we're going to do at every juncture, then there's only one thing that we could do, namely that which God knows we're going to do. So we see here how God's omniscience, God's foreknowledge, seems to cast doubt on our ability to be free. So sometimes the problem of divine foreknowledge is put as the problem of theological fatalism. God's omniscience, his foreknowledge, rules out our free will. Okay, and basically, the fatalism bit is that everything that we do is fated to happen on the basis of what God knows. Okay, what's Augustine's response to this problem? Well, his response is straightforwardly that the mere fact that God foreknows what we're going to do, he agrees with that, does not imply that what we do is inevitable. Okay, put slightly differently, the mere fact that God knows what we're going to do in the future does not mean that God causes us, or God makes it somehow fated that we do what we do. So God's foreknowledge, okay, does not cause or determine us to do what we do. So God's foreknowledge, as it were, doesn't rule out alternate possibilities. God doesn't make it inevitable that we do what we do. So there can still be, according to Augustine, alternate possibilities open to us to do other than what we in fact do, because God's knowing does not cause us to do what we do. Okay, so that's a bit repetitive, but I repeat it just in hopes that it will sink in. Okay, so the problem of divine foreknowledge, God foreknows everything that we're going to do. So God, in some past time, if you want to put it this way, knows what we're going to do at some future time. So God knows in the past that tomorrow I'm going to enjoy peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, now when that time comes about for me to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if God foreknows that I'm going to have that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then there's no way that I can avoid having that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I must have that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. God foreknows it after all. Now, Augustine's response is to say, yeah, God may very well foreknow, and God does foreknow that you're going to have that peanut butter and jelly sandwich tomorrow. But God's knowing that does not cause me to eat the peanut butter, make and eat that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the same would be true for any example that you were to bring up. Okay, so that helps us understand Augustine, his view of human nature a bit more. Our free will is such that it's not compromised by God knowing what we're going to do. Okay, so then let's turn to the last problem. Let's just say a few things about it, the problem of original sin. So there's a problem with Adam and Eve's fall in the garden, as many of you know. If you want to know more about that problem, you could watch my Judaism video where I discuss that problem the fall in the garden in a bit more detail than I'm going to here. But the basic idea is that there was a fall in the garden, Adam and Eve being the first human beings, and that fall in the garden, that sinning that occurred there, the use of free will in that moment led to consequences, negative consequences for all of humanity. Augustine, he theorizes about this. He develops a theology about the fall, and develops it in a much stronger way than we see developed in Jewish theology, for example. But Augustine argues that the fall in the garden, the sin, Adam and Eve's sin in the garden, it can be known as, can be called original sin, and the sin basically, you put it this way, infects all of humanity thereafter. So in Judaism, yeah, there's negative consequences that emerge from this fall in the garden. Augustine says this is original sin, and every human being, because of this original sin, is thereafter born with it, born with original sin. I mean, unless some kind of miracle occurs where God exercises or bestows someone with grace to remove the original sin, which Augustine thinks is possible. But the basic idea here is just that Adam and Eve sin, and then all of us, the rest of us, are born tainted with original sin, such that we're born with a sinful nature. So you see how a theory of human nature here gets developed through Augustine. We are such that, or our nature is such that, since the fall in the garden, we are tainted by original sin, and we need God's grace to overcome that original sin, such that we can do good. So the problem of original sin is just this. It seems that we're all born with a sinful nature according to the doctrine of original sin. Some of us are going to be damned as a result of original sin. That means some of us are going to go, according to traditional Christian doctrine, we're going to go to hell because we're tainted with original sin. But if we're tainted with original sin based on something that wasn't our fault, like Adam and Eve fell, that's not our fault, then how is it that we can be responsible for our being damned? It seems like who's responsible for our being damned is something outside of us, either Adam and Eve or God. And so the problem of original sin is just that there are many who are going to be damned, or there's some who are going to be damned at the very least, and it doesn't seem like it's the fault of those who are damned, because it's not their fault that they end up having a sinful nature. They're born with it after all. Well, Augustine says in response that, again, free will is the clue here. We are all born with free will, and we use our free will to sin. Or that's going to flow from our having a sinful nature, but we're going to use our free will in our sinning, and so we can be held responsible for being damned as far as we're damned. However, there's an asymmetry here. In order to do good, you need to have God's grace pull you up and basically heal you of the original sin. So again, free will is the way out of the problem for Augustine here. Thank you for watching, everyone.